All right, we are going to talk about the evolution of whales. So in other words, this is an example of evolution of an organism that we have studied through the process of radioactive dating, and that we are able to determine what the ancestors of the whale is. So whales are mammals just like you, and their ancestors once lived on land. So at one point, the ancestors of whales lived like we do on land and walked around. How do we know this? Well, there are several ways that we can determine if organisms are related to one another. One of them is this thing called homologous structures. So we look at the bones of all of these different organisms, and we can compare them. So scientists sometimes look at homologous structures shared by two organisms. Remember that a homologous structure is a structure that shows how certain species have inherited a trait from an ancestor. So for example, this is a dog paw, and we can look at the wrist all the way up to a horse, and we notice that it looks very similar. Okay, very similar. And human wrists do not. So we are able to see that dogs and horses definitely could be related. However, humans are not as closely related as those two species. We can look at missing links. So a missing link is a transitional fossil that exhibits traits common to both of these ancestral groups and its descendants. In other words, this is a fossil that we find that has traits of the really old ancestor and the current species, and we can kind of look at those traits that this one transitional fossil can show us, and that shows us that that's how it changed. So for example, here's a fish and there's its fin. Here's another fish, but look at its fin. It is shortened out and there are bones that are starting to grow in it, and it starts to look a lot more like a lizard. Okay, or a salamander, where they have individual toes. So you'll notice that it looks like there's some individual toes. You can look at the bones on here. They're starting to look very similar. Smaller bones in here, whereas this one didn't necessarily look like this. Okay, we wouldn't have necessarily been able to draw the relationship between a lizard and a fish until we found this transitional fossil. Excuse me. All right, here's another example of a missing link. So the discovery of archipelagic bridged the gap between the dinosaur and present-day birds, kind of like chickens. So we knew that dinosaurs existed based on fossils. We know that chickens exist because they still exist, but we weren't able to actually come to a conclusion that they were actually related pretty closely until we found this missing link, this Archaeopteryx. And if you notice, here's the actual picture of the fossil. You can see that we were able to see the legs and the arms and the feathers, okay, that were used, and that has very similar bone structure to the dinosaurs. And so we were able to say, oh, so this dinosaur transitioned into this, which eventually transitioned into a chicken, okay, or a bird. We can also look at similarities of DNA. So we can compare the DNA and note how many base pairs. Remember, that's base pairs are, this is a single base pair, this is another base pair, this is another base pair. We can see how many base pairs match up. So for example, if we compare the DNA of ourselves and the DNA of chimps, okay, they are 98% the same, meaning we have 98% the exact same base pairs in the same order as chimps do. And that demonstrates, since it's so similar, that we are related to one another. We have a common ancestor. Okay, so if we look at chimps, they look very similar in their DNA. Now, they may not look very similar on the outside, but remember, there is that 2% that is not the same, and that's really what codes for the differences between us. Another example is we can look at bacteria. So bacteria, we only share 7% of our DNA. So we only have 7% base pairs in common with bacteria. Okay, and obviously bacteria are very different looking than us, and that means that 93% are different, which tells us why we are so different. We can look at embryological evidence. So embryological evidence is actually looking at the development of embryos. So you might not be able to tell here what type of organism we are growing. Look, we've got tails, 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 and now we turn into a pig. But actually humans look very similar the whole way through. Okay, so embryological evidence, we can observe the embryonic, that's babies inside their moms, development of various species to see how closely they are related. For example, the chart above shows the development of a pig, rabbit, rabbit, cow, and human. Okay, pig, rabbit, cow, and human. Why do they all share related development? So look, this is all the same stage of a pig, rabbit, cow, and human. Again, similar stages for pig, rabbit, cow, and human. And here we go again, pig, cow, rabbit, human. Okay, and look, we are all very similar. Now this is very early on in development. But we all look very similar in our development, which tells us that we are all related. Okay, so there's the human, rabbit, cow, and pig. Because they are vertebrates, they all have a backbone. Vertebrates, the word vertebrate means backbone. So any organism that has a backbone is going to be considered a vertebrate. Any organism that does not have a backbone is going to be considered an invertebrate. Anyhow, back to the whales. So how did they come to live in the ocean? On your sheet, you will see the steps to reconstruct the evolution of a whale from land to sea. You're going to read the descriptions and use the traits drawn to help you draw the journey from the ancestral whale to present day. So here is the oldest ancestor, okay? Extinct land mammals with whale-like teeth, covered in fur and stripes similar to a tiger. It had 4 legs with feet that resemble hooves, okay, feet that resemble hooves of a horse, and a long snout tail. So based on the fossil record, and because whales are air-breathing mammals, scientists believe they must have descended from a land-dwelling mammal, such as the mesokind that lived near the ocean 55 million years ago. Okay, so this is the Mesonechid, thank you. Now the next one lived 50 million years ago. Okay, the Pakicetus. Okay, the Mesonechid evolved into a wolf-sized meat eater that ate mostly fish. It was still fur-covered, with a head that is becoming more of a whale-like shape with sharp teeth. It had 4 legs, small ears, and a long tail. So this is starting to look a little bit more, so this looked more like tiger, and now this is starting to look a little bit more like a whale on land. Ambulocetus, 48 million years ago, lived in both water and land. Heard sound through its lower jaw, so no longer had ears, leading to the sound receiving system in modern whales. Has webbed feet and uses hind legs for powerful underwater kicks. Head becomes longer and thinner, resembling a lizard's in shape. So this guy lived on both land and water. It evolved into a land-dwelling animal with shorter legs and webbed feet. This animal was able to swim well and was therefore able to survive off an abundant supply of food in the ocean. The next one is the Rhodesicetus. Hind limbs are reduced and smaller. Okay, the tailbone has become modified into a fin at the end. So now there's a fin at the end, an adaptation that allows for more efficient swimming. The 4 limbs are now completely fused together into fins, okay, and has front fins and head similar to an alligator in shape. So now this is starting to look a lot more like a whale, a lot less like a land animal. And remember, on your sheet you should be drawing the kind of modifications that I'm talking about on your sheet. So for each of these, as I describe it, you should be drawing the additions on the drawing on your sheet. All right, Basilaris isis, 37 million years ago. Body is more elongated and modified tail has become wider at the end, creating a larger tail fin. Hind limbs are further reduced, meaning they are less and less useful because it's spending more and more of its time in the water, and barely visible. The forelimbs are now noticeably fins, and head is similar to a dolphin in shape. Okay, still with very sharp teeth. Okay, so this is the next one, 37 million years ago. Dorodon, okay, this is a primitive whale. These organisms lived strictly in the ocean, so no more land at all. The nostrils have moved to the top of the head to become a blowhole, so now we've started to present the blowhole. Forelimbs are like paddle-like flippers, and hind limbs are now non-existent, so we no longer have them. Here's an actual thing of a Dorodon, and it starts to look a lot more like a whale. Okay, complete skeleton of the Dorodon. Notice that they do have little hind legs, but you can't see them from the outside. We can look at that. I'll let that load. I might actually post that for you guys to watch independently of this. So let's see how long that one is. All right. So, want to see it in action? Watch as the whale ancestors you just created evolve into modern-day whale in this In for a Swim video. Also, check out the Smithsonian whale video. So, you are going to have to watch a couple of other videos in order to finish this tonight. But yeah, I hope this makes sense, and please write down any questions that you have. Please write down any questions that you have, and we can talk about it tomorrow. Thank you.